Well, hi, Lauren. Welcome to the High Vibration Living Podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to chat with you. I just broke down a bunch of information to you prior to pressing record. Um, but let's just start with what do a lot of your clients come to you for? Like, where are they and what do they need help with?
Yeah, so we specialize mainly in endocrine conditions, but I would say the core endocrine conditions. So endocrine is just kind of like the fancy scientific term for hormone. But the core ones that we really treat the most are polycystic ovary syndrome or PCOS. We treat a lot of hypothyroidism as well as Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's is just the autoimmune state of hypothyroidism, but we also treat the non-autoimmune as well, and sometimes hyperthyroidism. But I would say hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's are definitely more prevalent just across the board in the population
Mhm.
in America or in the world,
Yeah.
really. And so we definitely see those more often. And then we also treat a lot of hypothalamic amenorrhea, similar to what we were talking about like before we started. Generally is defined as like not having a menstrual cycle for greater than 6 months. So those are the common core conditions, but sometimes individuals come to us and they haven't been diagnosed with anything. They don't know what's going on. They just know that something's off and they think it's hormonal. And so sometimes it'll just be someone's experiencing really irregular cycles. Acne is a common symptom, hair loss, fatigue, depression, anxiety, menopausal type symptoms during that menopausal transition. So sometimes it is more symptoms based, and maybe through the testing, we kind of uncover what could be at the root and then maybe send them off for a referral if we think that that's necessary as part of their treatment plan. But other times they're coming to us and they often have one or multiple of these endocrine conditions.
And what's the age group that people come to you for these different conditions?
Would say mostly between like 30 to 60.
Wow.
But every once in a while, there are younger individuals, maybe like middle, earlier 20s. But we definitely don't treat anyone that's in their teenage years or really less than like 23, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think one thing that a lot of people I think are just trying to figure out themselves at home, trying to self-diagnose is cortisol and high
Mhm.
cortisol versus low cortisol. How do we know that we're struggling with high cortisol without
Yeah, so
getting that?
yeah, so high cortisol I think is what everyone automatically goes to when they feel
Yeah.
the feeling of like anxiety or that wired but tired feeling. Often might experience this in the evening time where you feel tired but you also feel like so wired at the same time, and you should be going to sleep and you know that that's not correct. Sometimes people might experience anxiety or like sweaty palms, heart racing, elevated blood pressure, hair loss, acne. Those can all be symptoms of high cortisol. I would say most people aren't as aware of acne and hair loss being symptoms of high cortisol. I think that it's a bit easier for people to identify that feeling of like stress, anxiety, rushing, not having enough relaxation in your day as more of a feeling of high cortisol. But what's really interesting is that we probably, I would say, see across the board like a pretty equal split between high and low cortisol. And what oftentimes people don't realize is that low cortisol is just a response in the body from a long period of high cortisol. So, like a lot of systems in our bodies, right, is our body tries to overcompensate and it's like always trying to protect us. And so it's like, okay, you need me to keep pumping out more stress hormones. I'm going to keep doing it. And then eventually at some point, it's like, I'm tired. I need a rest. Whether you want to rest, I need to rest. And at that point is when we stop making adequate levels of cortisol. And so on the internet, you probably see this referred as like stage two adrenal fatigue. It's not really like a medical term. I try not to call it that because it's not really that your adrenals are fatigued. It's just like an adaptive response that the adrenals have just stopped making as much of the hormone because you've exhausted all the resources of overproducing it. And so oftentimes we see people in more of this chronic state of high cortisol that it's actually showing up as low cortisol, but they might still have a lot of similar symptoms to what someone might experience with high cortisol levels.
So is it something that you can even self-diagnose or do you really need to go and get a test?
I mean, testing is really helpful because it tells us more of the picture of is it high or is it low cortisol? So we know how acute or chronic this is. And it's also helpful to have other components than just cortisol. So, for example, generally when you're producing a lot of cortisol, it's going to start taxing the adrenals in other ways. So your adrenal glands is what I'm referring to when I say adrenals. They're like these two little glands on top of our kidneys that are what pump out stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine. But they don't just make stress hormones, they also make hormones like sex hormones. So we make a pretty good amount of testosterone there. You make androgenic hormones like DHEA, you make androstenedione, eticolinolin. These are other hormones that function very similar to how testosterone does as well. And so they can be a lot of the cause of why someone might be experiencing irregular cycles, hair loss, acne, not necessarily because it's the cortisol issue, but because the androgens that are being made in the same location are being impacted. So it is helpful to do testing that doesn't just look at cortisol, but really looks at all of those adrenal hormones together so that we can really deduce maybe why you're having the symptoms and then how to treat those imbalances.
So this might be like an old wives' tale, but I always thought that you can tell that your adrenals are taxed by having dark spots under the inner part of your eyes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like face reading. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way to look at your face or look at your body and see that your adrenals are being taxed? Or is it just a feeling?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, people that is a like a kind of a wives' tale, I would say, but I think there is some truth in it that is something that people can see. I would also say like early wrinkling or like more like plump loss in your face because you do lose collagen when the cortisol levels are chronically elevated. So we can see, like early wrinkling. You can even see like early graying as well, which oftentimes takes time for your hair to go gray. But if you're noticing that that's happening at a more rapid rate, then that can be a symptom. And then oftentimes a lot of like puffiness too. So a lot of times you could have like more of a round face or just like water retention, especially in kind of like the jowl type area, or just overall like water retention on the body to where like if you were to, lean up against a counter or something, you would see an indentation on your arm once you removed yourself from the counter.
Yeah, as a chef and someone that is always in a super stressful, in a rush situation, I know that when I'm overworking as a chef, that's what happens to me. My body swells up as a way to protect itself from overworking. And then as soon as I take a vacation, it's like all the water weight disappears and the adrenals are nourished and revitalized. Is there something
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah, I mean, your adrenals, they play a big role with sodium and water retention and things. And so you might be familiar with like antidiuretic hormone. That's the hormone that gets released that essentially prevents us from like going pee every second that we drink water. And so generally you should make a lot of antidiuretic hormone whenever you're sleeping. It's one of the reasons why when you drink alcohol, you pee a lot is because it actually shuts off that antidiuretic hormone. But your cortisol and antidiuretic hormone and renin, they're all of these like fluid retention type hormones. They all work in tandem with one another. So there is a correlation between fluid, water, electrolytes, and cortisol because of that.
So are there things that we can start doing at home that anyone listening can start doing at home to kind of nourish their adrenals or manage their cortisol levels? Should there be activities or routines that we have in the evening or on the weekends to help us?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a few key things, and we can talk about some of the more lifestyle and then also some of the like nutritional and supplemental things that you can do as well. Just starting with lifestyle, I would say the first thing is in the morning time, really trying to expose yourself to bright sunlight outside and getting that light on your eyes within the first 30 minutes of waking. I know it sounds
Mm.
crazy, but you have something called your pineal gland that's behind your eye. And your pineal gland is actually what regulates cortisol and melatonin production. So we want to send that signal to our brain, hey, it's daytime, make cortisol, shut off melatonin production, because then that's what starts your circadian rhythm, which then tells your body basically like start your 12-hour clock, start your shift, right? So that it knows then when to stop making cortisol and when to start making melatonin. They're counter-regulatory hormones. So if your cortisol is really high, you're blunting melatonin production. And that's one of the reasons why cortisol impairs sleep, because melatonin is our sleepy hormone, but it also is a really potent antioxidant in the body as well. So that light exposure in the morning essentially just helps to be able to regulate that whole system. Secondly, and this is something that I've found to be really helpful in my own life as someone that's like very type A and very go, 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 is just like trying to create more buffers into your day. And
Yes.
so, like I'm someone where I just try to be as like efficient as possible. I'm sure you're the same way as a chef. You're like, okay,
Mhm.
what can I start making right now so that it times to be the perfect time when this is done? Like all those
Yeah.
things I'm sure you have to be thinking about, right? But the more we can try to create buffers, so maybe something is going to take you, it's going to take you 15 minutes to drive somewhere. Can you add 15 more minutes to that? Knowing that you don't need that, but that it's just going to reduce that stress response because now you have 5 extra minutes to get out the door that you're not rushed. You've got 5 extra minutes to walk in the door whenever you get there. You don't have to be driving like a maniac, right? To be able to get there in 15 minutes. Or if something happens when you're driving, you're okay. You don't feel like a stress response because now you're going to be late. So you can do that in all formats, whether it's meetings or, different things you have going on throughout the day. Just trying to create little buffers is huge to get the body out of this constant state of fight or flight. Cortisol is naturally a good thing for us. We need a cortisol response in the body,
Mhm.
but the issue is this chronic, constant cortisol response
Yeah.
that's happening. So, like, if you feel stressed for 5 minutes in the morning, that's okay. But if we're feeling that stress constantly throughout the day, that's where it's more problematic and it starts to deteriorate our health. So, finding ways to become more cognizant of when your body's in this constant fight or flight state multiple times throughout the
Yeah.
day. In
Absolutely.
terms of nutrition, there are a lot of things that we can do. Our adrenals are very electrolyte and vitamin C dependent. We actually store the most vitamin C in our adrenal glands than anywhere else in the body. So, making sure that we have adequate vitamin C and especially just antioxidants in general is super critical. So, you can consume vitamin C. I mean, most of your plants that you're able to consume as like produce are pretty rich in vitamin C. You probably know about like citrus fruits like lemons and oranges and strawberries and kiwis being also very high in vitamin C as well. And then you can, of course, like supplement with those things. And just outside of vitamin C, I would just say antioxidants in general. So, your sulfur containing vegetables or things like your onions and garlic and your berries and your leafy greens. These are all really great ways to incorporate more of those antioxidants for your adrenal glands. We know that carbohydrate restriction can also perpetuate cortisol issues. So, there is this like sweet spot with carbohydrates, and everyone's
Mhm.
individualized in terms of like what they can metabolize and what are the best carbohydrate sources for you and things of that sort. There's so much minutia within it. But if you are in a chronic low carbohydrate state and you also are under a lot of stress, it's only perpetuating the high cortisol or like cortisol dysregulation. So it can be helpful to maybe implement carbohydrates at certain points of the day or, certain intervals to be able to help suppress this constant cortisol response from happening.
Yeah, and I feel like the fall season that we're entering is the perfect time for those healthier starches, because there's just more butternut squash and yams and sweet potatoes and all different types of pumpkins that we usually don't see, obviously, any other time of year because this is the season for them. And so just like meal prepping something like that and having a more health supportive starch kind of in the fridge, especially for people that are kind of struggling with their weight or they don't want to or can't comfortably process grains right now. I feel like this is a good season for playing with plant-based starches.
Yeah. Yeah, those are always my favorite. And I know I love winter squash season because I just think it's such a good, I mean, even just like a little bit more starchy than like broccoli would be, but less starchy than a potato would be, right? Like it's such a good
Yes.
middle ground.
Yes. Acorn squash, kabocha squash. There's
Mhm.
just so much out there these days, and there's 50 million ways to season it and make it delicious. And I think variety is the spice of life for our health. And so, like leaning into these different season and eating what it's abundant then, I think provides our body more nutrient variety and nutrient density that maybe can ultimately help us balance these adrenals, these cortisol issues, these hormones. And hopefully, that will force you to slow down and make some new recipes at home and sit down for a meal. That'll also help with our adrenals. Are
Yeah.
there are there particular practices that we can do? So, like a castor oil liver pack, or laying down with our legs up against the wall, or yoga classes. Are there actual activities that we can schedule in our day that have been known to help our adrenals or
Yeah, so anything that's like technically meditative is great, right? So we think of like meditation when you think of meditative, but really anything that's just forcing you to think about your breath is considered meditative. So that could be a walk, it could be yoga, it could be strength training to some degree. I mean, at some point it is creating a cortisol response. You have to be a little bit cognizant with, moderate and higher intensity exercise, but yeah, anything where you're really focusing on deep belly breathing, it's those short, shallow breaths that are that like high cortisol response. So, taking some time to loop that into your day. I always recommend trying to focus on like the bookends of your day. So, how can you slow down your first hour of your day to really focus
yes.
on light, breathing, these things that are helping regulate your nervous system? How can you do the opposite maybe in the evening? I mean, still keep the breathing in, but maybe we're not focusing on light. We're trying to keep more of a dark, cool environment, and we're focusing on ways to be able to shut off our brain, get off our phone and stop thinking about
Yeah.
work and all these things that we're prone to doing in the evening time, so that our body's in more of a rest and relaxed state to be able to fall asleep. Those can be really great places to start. I personally like to do like red light therapy every few days in the evening time. There is some research to show that that can also help induce sleep, as well as things like infrared sauna. I'm currently pregnant, so I can't do infrared sauna right now, but generally that's something as part of my daily or kind of everyday routine. So those can be great things if you have access to those. But yeah, if you don't have access to those, castor oil packs are a great secondary like replacement option where you are getting some of that liver benefit. They're basically, if you're putting them on your liver, then they are stimulating that bile flow through your liver and helping to detoxify. So they're not necessarily directly working on your adrenal glands, but overall, I think like it is relaxing you because you have to lay there with the castor oil pack on. It's usually warm. Warmth usually relaxes us. And it's something that overall is improving how your body's detoxifying, which is just overall improving your like resting state of inflammation.
Yeah.
Something I like to teach a lot of clients too is just starting to become mindful of the state in which you're eating. Because
Mhm.
so often we're eating in this like rush state. You're, maybe not your clients because they're getting a nice cooked meal from you. But if they aren't, then they might be, grabbing something on the go, running out the door and eating while they're driving, or they are eating while they're standing, or they're eating while they're working, and they're not actually focused on eating. And our body only digests and makes digestive juices like digestive enzymes and stomach acid and bile that we need to break down and absorb food when we are in a parasympathetic state, which is the opposite of high cortisol. High cortisol puts us into the sympathetic state where our body is not digesting, it's not making any of those juices. So, something simple that you can do is just a few rounds of deep breath before you start eating. There's a practice called box breathing that you might be familiar with. Essentially, it's just creating a box with your breath. So you can pick like the number 4, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, reset for 4, repeat that 4 times through, or however many times through you think that you need. I do this often if I like sit down for dinner and I'm feeling like anxious still from the day. I'm noticing that my heart's kind of racing. I just do a few of these deep breaths and just try to get my body more into that rest and digest state so that my body's more receptive to taking in that food. And it's not like I'm just eating and I'm not getting any satiety hormone signals. I'm not, getting any digestive enzyme release. And you'll notice a big difference in even simple things like bloating and fullness from a meal when you are more in tune with your breath before you do start chewing.
Yeah, two things that help me is going outside. And so definitely like back when I had a corporate job and I worked in an office, I tried to take my lunch outside, and that really helped me slow down for a minute and like catch my breath and really eat, chew my food, enjoy the meal. And the other thing that's always helped me is when I can eat the meal with another person. Like especially in this day and age, and since, I am often near a computer or phone, you don't want to be alone when you eat, or you feel like you're going to get bored, so you turn something on and you have a screen, but then that doesn't calm your nervous system. So I find that like when I can enjoy a meal with a friend or a family member, I eat less, I digest better, I feel better after the meal. Have you
Yeah.
ever found either of those things are supportive for you, either going outside or eating with another person?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, just being in nature is great for relaxing you, being around friends, family, right, that increases our love hormone oxytocin, and
Yeah.
oxytocin helps release cortisol or reduce cortisol levels. So I think they're definitely really great ways to be able to get some of the same benefit if you're not able to do the box breathing.
When it comes to belly fat, is that something that people are feeling or seeing because their cortisol levels are up, because they're rushing around all day, because their adrenals are taxed, or is it hormones? Is it all connected? What should people be looking at there when they feel like they're doing all the things and they're working out, but they're still struggling with that?
Yeah, the abdominal fat gain is definitely a sign of elevated cortisol levels. It can be for sure, right? We call it like the cortisol belly because of that. So, especially if you're noticing that your fat deposition has particularly happened in the abdominal region, you're not getting any in like other extremities, your legs, your hips, especially women in their reproductive years, our body is more it's more prone to store fat in those areas like your hips and your buttocks and things of that sort. So, if you're getting it in the abdominal region, that definitely can be a sign that there's elevated cortisol. As you go
Mm.
through menopause, it is more common to kind of shift your body fat storage patterns because you're dropping the estrogen and progesterone levels that are what are influencing that body fat storage in your hips and your buttocks and breasts and things of that sort, right? So, that can change a little bit. But when it comes to cortisol, yes, if it's in the abdominal region, definitely. And also, things to look at too are if you're noticing that you are also having other symptoms similar to that. So,
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier that your adrenals don't just make cortisol, but they also make those androgenic hormones. So you're going to make some testosterone, but you're also going to make DHEA and androstenedione, these hormones that function very similar to testosterone. And testosterone in women can also cause some of that fat storage in the abdominal region. We need enough testosterone to be able to
Yeah.
help with like fat metabolism and helping with gaining muscle mass and things of that sort. But if there's excess testosterone, then it can contribute to more of that abdominal body fat gain. So sometimes it is that it's just the adrenals, like your cortisol is elevated, and that's what's causing those androgens to be high that are driving that body fat gain. Other times we can see in cases of like PCOS or polycystic ovary syndrome that potentially the cortisol levels are normalized, but there are high levels of these androgens, whether it's coming from the ovaries or coming from the adrenal glands, and that maybe that's what's contributing to more of the belly fat storage.
It seems just like such a delicate balance. I mean, we know our bodies are strong and they're capable of adapting, but at the same time, it feels like it's such a delicate balance in life to keep your body consistent. And we all manage stress differently. We all manage our life experience differently. So I feel like that's why you see some people who like always look the same and it's like they never gain a pound or change. And then you have other people that like wear their emotional experiences on their body and they're always fluctuating. I just find it really fascinating how we all move through life and just trying to figure out what we can do to kind of nourish ourselves every day so we can have a little more balance.
Definitely. Yeah. It really is about being intuitive to, your body and
Hmm.
also getting that feedback from yourself and listening. And, I always say that like if you ignore those whispers, they become screams. So, if you hear little whispers from your body that things maybe aren't what they once were, not optimal, that
Yeah.
feel out of balance, you've got to act on those because if you let them keep whispering, it's just like your car service light, right? Eventually it blows up and you don't want that to happen. The same thing can happen with the human body.
Yeah, and I am 43 and I'm now just kind of getting that sense from my body that it's time to slow down a little bit, to not go as fast as I've been moving. And I'm sure you're finding yourself in the same place with your pregnancy where you're realizing that you can't pack as much in your day and still feel good. And it's a very interesting struggle between the mind and the body in creating a new balance in your day, knowing that there are certain things you just have to put off for another day.
Very hard. It's a constant battle, I think, right? Especially when you own your own business and other people relying on you. And, I saw something today and it was like, no, don't give in to like rush culture, like people wanting you to get back to them immediately. And I'm like, well, it's hard when you own your own business because if you don't get back to someone immediately, they go to someone else,
Yep,
right? So
exactly.
it
Yeah.
almost feels like you have to give in to rush culture because if not, then where's your business? So yeah, I think it's challenging of these different pulls and pushes that we're constantly trying to balance.
Yeah. And I don't have an answer for it. I mean, that's very much why I do this podcast, is because I just kind of like to keep learning about the different tools I can put in my tool belt. So at the end of the day, I can turn everything off at 8 o'clock and just like take a minute to kind of nourish myself and find the things that really work for me. Are there things that you like to do in the evening to help yourself wind down?
Yeah, so I mentioned like the red light therapy. I love doing that. I only do it every other day because some of the research shows that it actually can be kind of more harmful, I guess, if you're doing it every day, because
Okay.
it is upregulating your mitochondria, and those are what are producing energy. And so they need like some rest. It's like doing a stressful workout. You don't want to do it back to back days, right? So I usually do that like every other day, and I find that to be just really helpful for relaxation and helping with that melatonin production. We also have red light bulbs, and so we turn off the lights in the house, like the overhead, about an hour before bed, and then just turn on the lights that have the red light bulbs in them. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it's kind of weird because like the house becomes totally red, but they don't emit any blue light, and so that's also something that we want to try to refrain from because we know that the blue light that you get through your electronics, but there's also some that comes from like your regular light bulbs and things, does decrease melatonin production. It does block it. And so, with that, I also charge my phone in another room. I charge it in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And that's something that I started doing a few years ago that I really felt like had a profound effect because no matter how many times I told myself, don't wake up and check your phone in the morning, I
Mhm.
still could not get myself to stop doing it. And I still fall victim to it every once in a while. And my husband catches me, but most of the time
Yeah.
I don't because I just kind of go out the door, get my light exposure with the dogs, and then come back. And then I'm like, okay, it's been, an hour. I can check my phone now.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful too. Just something as simple as like sleeping with your phone in another room. I also use a hatch alarm clock, which like wakes you up with the sun. And I found that to also be super helpful. I know you asked about evening, but that's kind of like
Yeah.
more of a
I love
morning
that.
thing. But I find for a lot of people, and I kind of notice this myself too, is just like that anticipatory stress of the day where you like wake up to your alarm clock. You're like, oh my gosh, like I've got 45 minutes. Like I got to do X, Y, and Z right. Or even just the sound of an alarm clock, like especially the ones that are already on your phone, they can just be very like cortisol
Oh, it's
like
a horrible
jerking, right?
sound.
Like, yeah,
Nobody
they're just
likes that sound.
terrible. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
just, I mean, like you hear them on someone else's phone, and like even if you're not asleep, you're like, oh my gosh, like stress response. You feel
Oh,
from it, right?
yeah.
So I love the hatch alarm clocks because there's no, I mean, you can do like birds chirping or something, but truthfully, it just wakes you up with sun. And it's such a
Yeah.
gentler way to wake up and not feel this like instant cortisol response when you wake up.
Yeah, I keep my phone downstairs. My place is 2 stories, so I keep my
Mhm.
phone in the living room and I turn it off before I go
Nice.
to bed. I try to just completely turn it off no later than 9 o'clock. And then I use an old school alarm clock. I just went on like McGee and Go and like tried to find the
Yeah.
cutest old school alarm clock. And that's what I use. It's not as accurate as I would like it to be, but I make it work. You just like do the
Yeah.
best that you can. And then I have a skylight. So even if there are days where I forget to set the alarm clock, I ultimately wake up because so much light's coming in, I can't fight it. But I do not, if you're listening to this episode and you're remodeling your house, I do not recommend you get a skylight for your health. Like it is the most horrible thing ever because you can never sleep in, and it's not supportive if you're having a day at home where you really need to rest or nap. However, you know, there are natural benefits to it because I can't deny being exposed to the light first thing in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, there's pros and cons.
There's huge pros and cons. But I'd love to know, what are the top three health issues that your clients are coming to with right now? I love seeing the trends that are going on with people because it
Mhm.
often means there's a bigger trend going on with our food or our lifestyle, social media, whatnot. So I'd love to know what people are coming to you about.
Yeah, so I don't think this is like super recent, but definitely in the last couple of years, we've seen a huge uptick in long COVID and long haulers. So individuals who either got vaccination or had COVID that are dealing with long-term symptoms. It's been more than 6 months, and maybe they
Wow.
still haven't regained taste. They're still having brain fog. Even some so severe where like total neuropathy, loss of like motor control, just like total like disability from the effects. And so really life-changing situations that have happened. Not always is there a hormonal component. Maybe they've just been referred to me through someone who worked with us for something hormonal and knew that this is like something else that we treat. But yeah, that's been definitely something that's increased. And I would say alongside of that as well would be autoimmunity in general. So a big uptick in Hashimoto's, Graves' disease. Those would be the common autoimmune conditions, but sometimes we see like skin autoimmune conditions like psoriasis and things as well. And we know that autoimmunity is on the rise, and it can be because of these environmental exposures, vaccinations, whatever it might be that are triggering it. But I also think that our food supply and our lifestyle and things are huge drivers for really
Yeah.
triggering that genetic predisposition that individuals have. So many individuals struggling with like intestinal permeability or leaky gut because of our food system, and that
Yeah.
also we know that also being a big trigger for autoimmunity. So I would say those are two really big ones. The third one that we've seen actually in the last like month or so that I was just talking with my partner with is just irregular periods of amenorrhea. Kind of like goes in like shifts, I would say, in terms of amenorrhea, but definitely seen a lot more amenorrhea happening recently. And sometimes it's related to a goal of like conception. Someone's trying to get pregnant and they know like they're not having regular cycles and things. Other times it's just that they're having hypothalamic amenorrhea. And like I mentioned earlier, that's essentially just the definition of like not having a menstrual cycle for at least 6 months when you're in the
Yeah.
reproductive years. So not when you're in like the menopausal transition, but in the years
Yeah.
before that, that would be hypothalamic amenorrhea. And generally it's defined as there's no other causative factors. There's nothing like brain related that's causing that to happen. Sometimes it can be
Mhm.
like tumors and things. That's not the cause. It's truly a hormonal dysfunction because of lack of energy availability. So what that means is that our body basically doesn't have enough extra calories left over to be able to fund the reproductive system. Because the reproductive system is voluntary, our body doesn't need to reproduce to survive. It needs our heart and our lungs and our kidneys and things, right? So it's going to divert and prioritize energy to those other organs. The reproductive system takes a hit, and then basically the brain just stops communicating down to the ovaries to make these hormones. And then that's what shuts off the reproductive system. And so it's a bit of a process for that to happen. Generally, it takes about 3 to 6 months for that to occur. But I would say that the uptick maybe is because, people under more stress, maybe diet culture,
Yeah.
influence of social media, you name it, right? But generally, it's just because of a mismanagement, essentially, of energy reserves in the body.
Yeah, when we were chatting earlier, that happened to me when I was 25, when there was just less information out there about it. And it was truly just because of stress.
Mhm.
Going through a huge life change, tons of stress. And it just stopped and just required a lot of time for me to just really take care of my body. And ultimately, it came back. But
Yeah, there's
I
some
definitely
research that
say,
shows that like your HPA axis is most sensitive to stressors in like the first 10 years after menarche, which is like when you had your first period too.
no
So,
way.
yeah, so like that's why, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but like maybe you felt that same level of stress at 40, but it's not impacting you like from like a
Not at
menstrual cycle
all.
standpoint as it did when
Not,
you were 25, right?
yes.
Because your body's like it's had a period like for 10 more years, or 15 more years. And so the HPA axis is like more jointed together, if you will, right? There's
Yeah.
stronger communication channels. And so there's less likelihood of that stress impacting the hypothalamus signaling.
It is so true because now I could be in the most horrible, stressful for multiple days and weeks, and everything in my body works like clockwork. It's fascinating
Yeah.
versus how, one thing could really cause a huge hiccup for my little body in its 20s. So that's really fascinating. But I think we forget just what delicate little beings we really still are when we're 15, 16, and in our early 20s. Like, we're still new. And I'm sure you're looking at this all different, being, a mom and like growing a baby and just seeing how like delicate and young and fresh like these little beans are. It's just
Yeah,
a whole new perspective, and I'm sure it gives you like so much more respect for the human body and how it functions.
totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that you wish just women listening knew about their health right now? I feel like when it comes to men and women, like we never care about our health until there's an issue. So is there anything in particular that you wish that you would have known that was like an aha moment for you when you started to learn about hormones, or anything that you see that when you share it with your clients, it's always like that big aha moment for them and they kind of look at everything a little differently?
Yeah, I think one piece is, and this is like one of my reasons for fascination around is the, study of endocrinology is just because our hormones influence everything. You have hormone receptors in literally every place on the body. So, a lot of times people might come to us and they're like, I'm dealing with like bloating or I'm dealing with depression. And it's something that seems completely not related to your menstrual cycle at all. Because when you think of hormones, we always think of your menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
But the issue actually oftentimes does lie in the hormones because we have hormone receptors on our brain, on our heart, in all of these different
Mm.
places. And so your hormones really do influence everything in terms of how your body does function. And the goal is never to have like perfect hormones because I don't even know what that is, right? Like there's no textbook definition, there's ranges for every hormone of like where things should be. And so really we're never trying to strive for like perfection. It's kind of like it's a moving target, right? But what we're trying to strive for is the balance of one another to where it's protective for the body, it's supportive of the body, and that you feel your absolute best at that place too. And wherever that place is, then that's what we hold on to, right? And we try to find how do we keep that going. And knowing too that like your body's going through different seasons. And I think sometimes people get very fixated on, how should I do something for like the rest of my life? Or,
No.
like
Yeah.
always thinking of things in this very like long term time plan. But I think that that can feel really overwhelming for us. And also times it can, it isn't even true because our body's constantly changing. And so instead of trying to like be married to a certain eating pattern or be
Mhm.
married to a certain type of exercise or a certain like schedule and things, trying to be more fluid with really just listening to your body of like what it might need. And maybe this isn't like every month you need something different, but there's different seasons. You might probably need something different in your 20s and you need it in your 30s. You definitely
Yes.
need something different when you're in your reproductive years than you do when you're in your menopausal years. And so we have to stay fluid and open to how our nutrition needs, both what we're eating, how we're eating, our movement, our lifestyle, how we're managing stress, how we're approaching these different variables, how those can all look in these different seasons of our life.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And one of my mantras is it's not forever unless you want it to be. So like if you're going through a particular season in your life, like it doesn't have to be that forever. And I completely agree with food, and I hope just more men and women start to embrace that what worked for them in their teens and 20s isn't going to work for them at other stages in their life. Like little things are going to have to adapt. It doesn't mean that you have to give away your favorite foods, but you might have to upgrade some of the ingredients, or you might have to add things in that you didn't before. But one thing to keep in mind is your taste buds turn over every 7 years. So foods that you tried that you didn't like, that you hear are good for you can always give them a shot again. There was a time that I didn't like oysters, and now I love oysters. I can't get enough. And I think part of it is because I know there's just so many good health benefits there, but also they're fun to eat. They're pretty. Like there's endless ways that you can season them. Like I can't believe there was a time that I didn't like them, but we change and evolve, and so we have to absolutely be flexible. And I think that's maybe what our hormones and our adrenals and our cortisol levels really want.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you're really into right now in the health and wellness spiritual space?
Well, I feel like my life is kind of engulfed with being pregnant right now. And so I'm very much focused on all of the things related to that personally. I've been really fascinated by learning more about the hormone oxytocin, which hasn't really been something of focus for me because, it's just something you think about as it relates to maybe like pleasure or, love and things of that sort. But it really does play a fascinating role in so many other aspects of the body, and particular like in labor for anyone who might be listening. You have oxytocin receptors, they actually increase the amount of oxytocin receptors that you have tremendously during labor. And it's the oxytocin that's actually what helps with contractions to be able to get the baby out. So yeah, so you need that oxytocin, and you need a low cortisol state in order to have adequate oxytocin. In order for contractions to happen, you want those contractions because that pain is actually what helps to be able to make more oxytocin. They kind of are this like feedback loop that feed into each other. But it's just fascinating, the role of oxytocin as it relates to non-pregnancy too, and how it influences things like our stress response, our cortisol, our mood, our neurotransmitter levels and such as well. I've also been very fascinated and very into a lot of like the research around mental health disorders and
Mhm.
hormones and nutrition as well. And so, there's a lot of new research that's been coming out about the metabolic reason for things like depression and
Yeah,
schizophrenia and some of these mental health related disorders. And we're just learning more and more about how sensitive the brain is to glucose metabolism, and just the importance of blood sugar control and how much that plays a role in our mood as well, not even just our metabolism and our weight and things of that sort. But what we know about things like Alzheimer's and dementia now is that they're kind of, we call them like type 3 diabetes, because in those
yeah,
situations the brain is insulin resistant, and the brain is basically getting starved of energy. And so we can use a different fuel source by providing the body with nutritional ketones to be able to help the brain still have fuel so that there is energy. And we're learning that maybe that's actually the same thing that's happening in situations like depression and schizophrenia, and bipolar as well, that the brain actually is getting starved of energy essentially because of this insulin resistance, and that we
yeah.
can provide the brain with a secondary fuel source. And so I've been experimenting with that, and trying out different things with my own family members and such, and diving into more of the research on this. And yeah, I just think it's a really very interesting emerging field that might show promising development for individuals that have like treatment resistant depression and things.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where we go with food as medicine
Yeah.
because I think we're actually going back to a lot of information that we've always had in how to properly eat through different seasons for different times in our life in order to create balance within the body. And I'm really excited to hear that more people are looking at adjusting diets in order to change their mental health. Because as they say, your food and the Mountain Dew isn't going to make you happy. The Mountain Dew is going to keep you in the state. Um, so I'm just really hopeful that we'll learn how to apply this information in ways that can really help people. Because I think it's out there, but it needs to be believed and the studies need to happen at a broader level for it to be acceptable.
Yeah, and there's so much within it, because oftentimes with that population, a lot of like motivation, or they
Yeah,
struggle with these behavior changes because of the
yeah,
depression. And so it is very challenging to maybe administer more of this food as medicine type way. A lot of times there is like emotional eating and things that come into play. So I think that it's also fascinating to think about as like, not just what is the treatment, but how do we administer this a treatment effectively? And does it need to have different approaches at different levels? Maybe it's like the first month someone's like being provided their meals so that they don't
yeah,
have to make any decisions, and then
yeah.
after that month it's like, okay, now integrate them into actually understanding how to use food as medicine for more of a lifelong type change.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think anyone that's been in a down point in their time, like even dealing with preparing food for yourself is hard. So, access to someone nourishing you to get you over that hump. It's like when you first have a baby, it's so important for people to bring meals to the house or that there's someone in the house that's designated to preparing the food so that the mother can be with the baby and the mother can physically recover and the right foods are being brought to her so everyone gets fueled. It's it's kind of one and the same. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how we as a culture and a being evolves in that way to support each other through food. Do you maybe have one last tip that you can consider, one last tip that the people listening today can consider adding into their life?
Yeah, I mean, on this topic of food as medicine, I'm just such a believer in it. And, I think that it's so important when we're thinking about food to not just think about the calories that are in food, right? And so often I think, and I do believe that we're getting away from this way of thinking, but that maybe there still are some individuals that do believe that like calories trump everything. And
Yeah.
I do think calories do matter. We do know that energy balance matters to some degree, but ultimately, we know that if we're talking about things like weight loss, for example, like you're not going to get very far unless your hormone insulin is low. In order for us to lower your hormone insulin, we can't just focus on calories. We have to focus on your blood sugar control. Or if we're trying to actually improve energy production, we're trying to get your mitochondria to function better. It's not just about how much you're eating. It's about what are the compounds in what you're eating. Like, are you getting enough minerals and vitamin B vitamins and these different antioxidants that are needed to be able to convert the food you eat into energy? So, like I have a free thyroid food as medicine grocery guide on my website for anyone that
Mm.
might be interested in that. If they're dealing with like a thyroid disease or something of that sort, it's just specific to, okay, what are those medicinal foods specific to the thyroid? Because the thyroid is very vitamin and mineral dependent. That can be a great place to start. But starting to really shift your mindset from thinking about food as an energy balance conversation and more so about, okay, what is this healing property that it's providing me? And like, how is it actually affecting me on a cellular level? And if maybe you don't know, that's where doing the research on it can be so fascinating to learn these things. And like you said with the oysters, it really does motivate you to want to eat these things that maybe you don't enjoy flavor
Yeah.
wise as much because you understand how truly good they are for you. And somehow, some way, I swear, when you know that they're good for you, it just makes it automatically taste better.
It changes the whole experience, you know? And then I also think like plating and beauty. Like, so if there's something that you want to eat and it's not enticing you, like go on Instagram and find someone who's beautifying it. Find
Yeah.
someone who's like making it and serving it in a way that like speaks to you and try it that way. There's all different approaches, so don't give up so quickly if it might be like just a simple way to get the nourishment you need.
Yeah, and even simple things like silverware and,
Mhm.
little like cups and things of that sort. Like I know I got
Yeah.
like gold silverware and I swear like every time I eat now I'm like so excited because it's gold.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's like it's the little things that make sitting down for a meal just, more enjoyable and like why not?
totally.
It's like the saying that it's like why are you saving the crystal for just when you have guests over? Like drink out
Yeah,
of the crystal every day.
exactly.
Well, where can people connect with you, learn from you, and make an appointment to get support from you?
Yeah, so my practice is called Functional Fueling. Our website is functionalfueling.com. And then I'm over on Instagram at functional.fueling. I also have a podcast called the Strength and Hormones podcast. We put out pretty much weekly episodes on there. And then, like I mentioned, we have that free, like, food is medicine thyroid grocery guide. We have like free workshops and other free resources, blogs, and things of that sort on our website as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your insights with me, Lauren. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Whitney.